Well, welcome to Christian Answers. My name is Jeff Short, and today we're going to be talking about a pastor out in California of a megachurch pastor, Menlo Park Presbyterian Church out in Menlo Park, California. We're going to be talking about Pastor John Ortberg, who formerly taught at the large megachurch Willow Creek in Barrington, South Barrington, outside of Chicago, Illinois. And Pastor Ortberg has been forced to resign, basically, by his elders, and he has decided to resign because of a controversy that developed about 6 months ago when it became known that his son, John Ortberg III, had admitted to his father, John Ortberg, that he had some kind of attractions to children, and that John Ortberg, the pastor, kept that under wraps, and he didn't say anything to the congregation, and he also let his son continue working with children. I guess he's part of the children's ministry there at the church. And so there was a big controversy, and a lot of people thought that he should resign, and lo and behold, he has resigned now, and he has officially stepped down from his position there at the church. And what I want to do today is I want to talk about this, and I want to give some kind of a balanced perspective on this, because a lot of people are wondering what's happening, what's going on, why was this person allowed to continue in ministry, and why was this person allowed to continue on seemingly without any kind of repercussions or anything like that. And so I want to talk about that. So let's get into that article right now, and we'll just read through the Religion News Service article on the whole situation and try to sort this out. This is something that it's not something pleasant to talk about, but it's something that as Christians, we need to sort out, and we need to talk about just for future situations where there might be something that comes up and in the future at our church or at some church that we are connected with, and we need to think this thing through. All of these problems can serve as examples for us. So when we have a knowledge base of experiences, and wisdom would then dictate you draw upon those. And here is an example of a megachurch pastor who made a bad decision, and the decision was to not move his son out of his position in children's ministry or his work in children's ministry, and to just keep him there and keep it quiet and everything like that. That was his problem. Now, should he have resigned? Should he have actually left the ministry here at the church? I'm not sure. I think there might have been some hyper-emotional, feeling-based reactions where we're going through in society today. There's just so many people that become offended, and there's an outrage mob going on, cancel culture, and people are so quick to cancel people for doing things that they find offensive, but have maybe they're not sinful, they're not, they're questionable calls, but you don't cancel a person and you don't remove a pastor necessarily from his position because he makes a decisional mistake. There are no reported problems that developed with this situation, no children who were offended, no problems. This son of John Ortberg did nothing that we know of wrong, and John Ortberg, evidently, his worst problem was that he just simply didn't remove the son or ask the son to be a part of some other ministry away from children, with the knowledge that his son had some kind of attractions to children. So That was his crime, but he is now out as pastor because it seems like our culture and our social situation now demands that if someone offends someone at some point and doesn't do something the way they think it should happen, they then cancel the person. So I think this is way overblown, but let's read through the article. You see what you think. I think you'll agree with me at the end. In the summer of 2018, a volunteer at Menlo Park came to John Ortberg seeking help. The congregation member who volunteered with youth and children at the Bay Area megachurch and in the community had been experiencing an unwanted thought pattern of attraction to minors and needed the pastor's support. After hearing this admission, Ortberg asked the volunteer, had he ever acted on that attraction? The volunteer said no. Once Ortberg was convinced the volunteer was telling the truth and was not a danger to others, he prayed for the person and offered a referral for counseling and then allowed the volunteer to continue working with the children. Now, that's the error of John Ortberg. That's his crime. That's his fault. He did not overreact, but he did underreact. Should he have lost his job because he underreacted? No, I don't believe he should have. But he definitely should have, and I think he would now say he should have, once he knew this information, he should have made sure that this person was not working with children. That makes sense. Now, why didn't he do anything with this volunteer? We'll find out later here. In what Menlo Park Church elders would later call poor judgment and a betrayal of the trust, the megachurch pastor did not notify the church staff of the volunteer's admitted attraction to minors. He did not notify the church's elder board. He did not suggest the volunteer stop working with children. In fact, the pastor and his family encouraged the volunteer in his work as a coach of an ultimate frisbee team for high school students. Instead, Ortberg, the lead pastor Menlo, kept what he had learned about the volunteer secret from his congregation. Especially the volunteer's name, Johnny Ortberg III, the pastor's youngest son. So that is probably, we can put two and two together. The reason he didn't want to remove his son from his volunteer position with the children was that it was his son, and he felt he could believe his son. But nothing in a church or a church family stays hidden forever, which is kind of a good thing because that keeps everybody accountable. If you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, it's going to come out. So don't do it. That's a great deterrent. If you know what you're going to do is going to be made public, well, then definitely stay clear of that. And I often say in my pastorates that I don't want to say anything or do anything that I wouldn't be willing to walk up to the pulpit and admit to the entire congregation. So that's a good rule. Don't say or do anything that you couldn't openly admit in front of the congregation. And that will keep you clean, and it will keep you pure and holy before God and before men. Okay, let's go on. Concerned about the safety of the children in the church and his brother's well-being, the elder Ortberg's other son, quote, son, Daniel Lavery, revealed his father's actions in an email to Menlo Park Church leaders in November 2019 and made a public break with his parents. At that point, Lavery chose to keep the reasons for the break confidential. Okay, we'll find out later that this so-called Daniel is actually Ortberg's daughter, who is a transgender, so-called transgender person now. The controversy that ensued tarnished the reputation of the father, who'd built a career as a friendly, non-confrontational evangelical pastor who had mostly avoided culture wars battles while promoting seeker-friendly evangelism and conservative value of family and sexuality. Before coming in 2004 to Menlo Park, a San Francisco area congregation about 5,000, John Ortberg and his wife Nancy had been teaching pastors at Willow Creek Community Church, one of the nation's largest churches in the suburbs of Michigan. And I think I might have heard John Ortberg speak over at Willow Creek Community Church because I once lived in Illinois. I got my education at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. I then moved up the street to Trinity Evangelical Seminary in Deerfield, Illinois. I got my first pastorate in Chicago, Illinois at a Hispanic Baptist church. And so all along the way there, I had attended certain conferences and workshops over at Willow Creek, as have most pastors in the church, the Illinois area, especially around Chicago area. In 2014, Menlo left the Presbyterian USA to join a breakaway denomination called ECO, a Covenant Order of Evangelical Presbyterians. The church cited theological differences in the break, which came after years of dispute in the PCA USA over sexuality, and paid close to $9 million in order to keep its property. So that's a good thing. Menlo Park broke with the PCUSA, which has gone liberal, far liberal, compromising doctrine, compromising morality, and so forth. So that's a good thing that they left the PCUSA and joined a splinter denomination. After the initial Menlo investigation, the Reverend Ortberg took a leave of absence and was reprimanded by the church in early 2020. He underwent a brief restoration process. Then Ortberg, a popular speaker and evangelical leader who played a key role in drawing public attention to allegations of misconduct against Bill Hybels, the legendary founder of Willow Creek, returned to the pulpit, and the church hoped to move on. So a little side note there, yes, John Ortberg and his wife Nancy were instrumental in pushing for the ouster of Bill Hybels at Willow Creek, and now this is happening to him. Lavery wrote in his initial 2019 email that he hoped Menlo's leadership would conduct a robust, thorough inquiry into the matter. But in June, believing the church had failed to do so, Lavery posted his email to the church elders, this time revealing his brother's name on social media. The revelation that the volunteer was John Ortberg's son raised many questions that remain unanswered. And a group of critics, including Lavery, a church members, and a former friend of the Ortbergs and others, hope public pressure will cause the church to conduct what they call a more thorough investigation. So this article is a few weeks old, July 6, and now we do know that John Ortberg has stepped down. But I wanted to read this article because it gives the basic facts of the situation minus the conclusion that John Ortberg stepped down. Lavery had high hopes when he planned to meet with his brother, who is in his early 30s and a graduate of University of California, Santa Cruz, in the fall of 2019. The two had been close in the past, said Lavery, an author and Dear Prudence advice columnist for Slate.com. But the relationship between the two had become strained after Lavery publicly came out as trans earlier in 2018. So this is a girl, this is a woman who has supposedly so-called transitioned into a man, which we know that's impossible. You can't change the DNA structure of your body to some other sex. You are stuck with the sex you are. And she was born a woman, and she'll always be a woman, even though she may try to look like a man. I noticed that my brother would no longer use a name or pronouns to refer to me, Lavery told Religion News Service. He stopped returning my texts. He avoided me, and that was very painful. Okay, so there's some history here. After talking to his family, Lavery reached out and invited his brother and his sister, Laura Ortberg Turner, to visit the apartment that Lavery shares with his wife, Grace, who is also trans. Okay, this is really messed up. And that's what happens in the 21st century when you have a society that's going down, morally speaking, and you have a church that doesn't stand up very strong against this. Family members told Lavery that Johnny was having a hard time understanding his gender transition and that Lavery should be gentle with him. Lavery hoped that the two could reconcile. Instead, the meeting would shatter their family to pieces. Things started out well, said Lavery. All three siblings met at Lavery's apartment and visited for a while before Turner, a writer and former RNS columnist, left. After their sister departed, Lavery and his brother talked for a bit on the state of their relationship. Then, according to Lavery, his brother turned to him and said, "I have something to tell you." It was then I learned that the reason my brother had been avoiding me was not only because of my transition, but because everyone else in the family knew that he was a pedophile and I didn't. Okay, so now that's interesting. He said he's a pedophile. Apparently he hasn't acted out on any of his attractions. So are you a pedophile if you don't act out on the attraction supposedly that you have? Johnny Ortberg declined repeated requests for comment. Lavery said his brother told him that for years he had experienced sexual attraction to children but never acted on that attraction. He told Lavery that he had shared his secret to his parents and his sister the year before. Still, his brother continued working with kids. According to Lavery, the family had a group chat where they cheered on the ultimate Frisbee team, his brother's coach. Lavery feared that he had become complicit in giving approval to someone who could be a danger to children. So here is a person a perverted sexual person who has bought into this LGBTQ plus ideology, and he is now coming after his family, and he's the one that's supposedly standing on high moral ground. This is such an absurd situation. So the sexual pervert is worried about her brother, doing something wrong when this perverted sister who is transitioning to a male is actually doing something demonstrably wrong. And yet she, whoever you want to call it, is the one pointing the finger and saying, "Oh, I have to expose this because it says here, someone who could be a danger to children." Lavery was also concerned that his brother invoked the phrase virtuous pedophile to describe himself, a term used by an online support group of people attracted to children who never act on that attraction and who maintain that abuse is wrong. Some group members believe it is safe, even healing, for people for this attraction to work with children. Now that's questionable for anyone that is attracted in this way to work with children. That seems to run counterintuitively. So it sounds like this Johnny Ortberg III had some kind of mixed up thinking if he actually believes that working with children would cure him of his attraction of children. That doesn't seem to make sense at all, which is probably one of the reasons why this whole issue blew up and why maybe when John Ortberg, the pastor, I don't know if he suggested it, but maybe the son, Johnny III, objected to leaving children's ministry. After his brother left, Lavery spoke to his wife, his so-called wife, and to Nicole Cliff, a close family friend, and then he called the father. I had entered that phone call thinking surely we will be wanting the same thing, which is for Johnny to get treatment and not be alone with children, Lavery told RNS. It's not safe for children. It's not healthy for Johnny. Lavery called his father, saying his brother would have no reason to live if he could not continue his volunteer work. Now, that is very strange. Why would he have no reason to live? And why was that kind of work all important to him? That suggests there was a problem there, definite problem. Because if you have a person who is attracted to children saying that they or his father saying he would have no reason to live if he couldn't work with children. That is twisted. I became convinced that my parents did not have my brother's best interest at heart. When his father refused to act, Lavery wrote the initial email to church leaders expressing his concern, detailing his conversations with his brother and father, along with his brother's long history of work with children. He also cut ties with his family and took his wife's last name, his so-called wife. So this girl, this woman, married another trans person, and it's all twisted here. I would not share this information with you unless I believed that there was a credible basis for a serious and thorough investigation of every aspect of my brother's work with children and the cover-up my parents have conducted. In the most charitable reading possible, my parents have acted with unconscionable disregard for their responsibility as leaders and ministers and parents. Okay, so it's somewhat of a long article. Let's skip down. So we get the gist of the problem here. The gist of the problem was that John Ortberg, as the senior pastor, knew about John Ortberg III's, his son, his 30-something son, attraction to children, and he did not require that the son prohibit the son from working with children at the church. And I think it would have been totally reasonable for the pastor, John Ortberg, to say to his son, well, in light of what you have told me, it only makes sense that you not work with children if you're attracted to them sexually. And that's what we assume that he meant. He's attracted to children. That would mean a sexual attraction to children. And that could well be a temptation to pedophilia. If that is so, then of course you don't have someone that is so attracted working with children. That's just common sense. And the failure of John Ortberg to see that is probably what, no doubt, is what forced him to resign. Now, my question is, why would John Ortberg need to resign if he made a mistake and he failed to act wisely in this matter? Why does that demand that he resign? Why does that demand that he stop being the pastor? Yes, he made a mistake. Yes, if he could have done it over, he would have done it differently. But he was really, sincerely convinced that his son was no threat to those children. And he made that call. Now, that was not a wise call. It was not a prudential call. Out of the abundance of caution, that was not something that should have been called. And he clearly made the wrong choice. And we can understand why he would have made that wrong choice. We can kind of get into the mechanics of it. And the reason is he wanted his son to continue to fulfill a ministry function in this children's ministry. And he was convinced that there would be no problem with it based on his conversations with his son. And it sounds like this sister, who is now transitioning to be a man, is all messed up, and she's got some other motives too. And so she's going to be a busybody. She's going to cause trouble. She's going to go on a power trip, and she's going to claim that she's all virtuous and she's only doing it for the children's sake, but it's not. She's trying to stick it to her brother, and she's trying to embarrass her family, and she's trying to do all these other things. She is trying to force the church to do what she thinks should be done when she is in no position to force the church to do anything. She's living in sin. She's living in outright sin. She's living in outright rebellion. And now she's going after her younger brother and her father and her mother and the church elders as if she's on the higher moral ground, and she's going to point out their sins and their faults. And she's in no position to do that because of her own sins. There is definitely a situation where she is doing something more than just trying to be a good Samaritan. But the question is, after all of this came out, after John Ortberg's decision to not report this, after his mistake in allowing his son to function in the children's ministry, after all of that, why fire him? Why force him to resign? Why not have him apologize to the church? Why not him say, I am really sorry for this family matter that I failed to decide properly, and I let you down as a pastor, but I promise that I will do better in the future if you give me another chance. And I think the congregation should have given him another chance. Why do we shoot our wounded? Why do we look for reasons to fire people? Why? It's the same thing in the culture today, this cancel culture. If you don't do everything 100% correctly, there is no grace. There is no forgiveness. John Ortberg made a mistake, no question about it. I think he admits that he made a mistake. If he could have done it over, he would have made an entirely different decision. But having done that, there was no harm that came out of this. No one was injured. No children were injured. There was no harm, no foul, except for the fact that he exercised a bad decision. And so why would you fire your pastor on the basis of exercising a bad decision? No one is perfect. No one makes the right choices all the time in their life. And John Ortberg is just an example of that. So why do we have a standard that says a pastor has to be perfect and has to make all the right decisions? And if he fails one time in any area, then it's all over. And why let the gay activists and the LGBTQ activists, why let them dictate the situation? Why let this trans daughter, why let her put pressure on the congregation? And why let the political correctness of our PC culture, our cancel culture, determine what happens in the church? I think we're making a big mistake if we take our cues from our culture instead of taking our cues from God and God's word. Well, I could go on and talk about this, but I think the best thing to do would be to recognize that there was a mistake made, but just because a pastor makes a mistake, it doesn't mean you give him the boot. And I think that this church really needs to examine itself here in this situation. We'll see you back next week on another edition of Christian Answers. God bless.